Welcome back, everyone. Today we're going to be shedding light on why you should quit your job 100% of the time as an employee. So why would it behoove you to quit your job 100% of the time as an employee? Why is it the prudent, optimal, circumspect decision to pivot out of the employee workforce 100% of the time? Well, without further ado, without further delay, allow me to demystify that answer to that inquiry right here, right now. As you are unequivocally aware, there are a multitude of reasons as to why you should pivot out of the employee workforce. Unfortunately, much to my dismay, much to my chagrin, much to my consternation, much to my grief, much to my agony, much to my distress, the interests of the employee and the employer are diametrically opposed to one another. They are unequivocally unaligned, to say the least. There's a conflict of interest between the employee and the employer. What does this mean? Well, let me just explicate what it means. The employer always wants to pay the employee the absolute minimum amount of revenue for the maximum amount of time worked, whereas the employee wants to be able to receive the absolute maximum amount of revenue for the minimum amount of time worked. In an employer market, the employer holds all the cards, they hold the leverage over the employees, and the employees, out of desperation, they make the imprudent decision to lamentably succumb to working dispiriting, agonizing, debilitating, wretched, harrowing, dead-end, minimum wage jobs for a pittance of a non-subsistence wage in order to appease an employer who doesn't give an iota about their well-being, health, happiness, nor dignity. That is a grim reality of the situation. Now, why is a employee's future prospects so bleak if they succumb to working for an employer full-time? Well, as you are unequivocally aware, the employee job does not pay anything close to a livable wage. The minimum wage does not pay the employee enough to be able to afford to attain their basic needs that are relegated to the utmost lowest level tier, a part of Maslow's hierarchy of needs pyramid. So the employee can succumb to working for the employer for well over 60 hours per week, and at the end of the day they still cannot even afford to fund their basic housing needs. That is the bleak reality of the situation. It is a broad Dignagian issue of unprecedented proportions, and is quite the calamitous predicament that is ushered into the employee's life because they keep themselves entrapped in wage slavery, and in spite of all their hard work, efforts, and time, they cannot pull themselves out of the muck and mire. They cannot discharge their debts. They cannot lift themselves out of poverty, and they wind up succumbing to living a life fraught with chronic poverty, insurmountable debt, destitution, and indigence as a result of perpetually remaining an employee. Their tenure as an employee is not serving them. If anything, it is a disservice to themselves, to say the least, because they are also borrowing equity out of their sacrosanct, indispensable, invaluable, non-replenishable, finite time, as well as borrowing equity out of their life, dignity, happiness, health, and future wealth just for a pittance of a non-subsistence, infinitesimal minimum wage to provide them with short-term relief. There are a copious amount of hidden costs or covert costs appertaining to working an employee job. You are not only borrowing equity out of your time, life, health, happiness, dignity, and future wealth to be able to provide yourself with a pittance of a non-subsistence, infinitesimal wage, but you're also causing yourself to succumb to chronic burnout, chronic fatigue, chronic stress, an increased mortality rate, a decreased longevity rate, telomere shortening, chromosome unraveling, accelerated cellular aging, as well as an increased risk of contracting a deleterious chronic disease that can shave off decades of your life. Moreover, when you work an employee job, you are borrowing equity out of your vehicle to subsidize your minimum wage. How is this possible, you may ask? Well, you are incurring vehicle depreciation costs when you commute to and from the office. Furthermore, it also bears fuel costs, oil change costs, and increased vehicular maintenance costs when you commute to and from work. So just bear that in mind. It is expensive to replace your vehicle with an operable, functional vehicle that can transport you from point A to point B. And unfortunately, much to the employees' dismay, employers are typically reticent about allowing their employees to work remotely, in spite of the fact that it can save them a significant amount of time and money and fuel costs if they were able to avail themselves of that opportunity. The employee is at the mercy of the employer. They need to accede to accepting their demands. If not, they could get furloughed, terminated, laid off at any given moment. As an employee, your company can become defunct at any given moment, which would leave you jobless and would cause your minimum wage income to precipitously plunge to $0, which is problematic to say the least. These are the hidden costs of being an employee. On the other hand, if you're an entrepreneur, while your income may be commission-based, you're never going to lay yourself off. And even if you're egregiously underperforming, your income is apt to plummet to $0 per day, especially if you have a multitude of revenue streams that allow you to generate revenue 24/7, or that at least have the latent potential to generate revenue 24/7. You want to be able to manifest a prosperous, auspicious, abundant, robust future into reality, and not usher in a future that is fraught with chronic poverty, indigence, destitution, nor insurmountable debt. And the only way to do that is by being an entrepreneur. As an entrepreneur, there is no income limit to how much income you can earn. As an entrepreneur, you have the latent potential to generate revenue 24/7, and you could focus in on growing a behemoth of a brand, as well as creating income-generating assets for the prospect of having your recurring revenue streams grow to the extent in which they can offset your recurring expenses. You do not want to trade your sacrosanct, indispensable, non-replenishable finite time for a pittance of a non-subsistence wage. In order to receive $1,000 on autopilot from dividend payouts, you would need to have $600,000 invested minimum in the equities market, in which your equities offer 2% dividend yields, to say the least. So if you were to work an employee job, hypothetically, if you were able to miraculously save $5,000, which you wouldn't be able to because these employee jobs do not pay a livable wage, but let's just say you were able to somehow miraculously save $5,000, it would take you 12 decades, a century and 2 decades, or 120 years to be able to receive $1,000 on autopilot per month from dividend payouts, assuming that your equities had dividend yields of at least 2%. So I just do not see the merit in working an employee job, especially when there are all these hidden costs. They pay the CEO at least 347,000% more, and the shareholders value 1 hour of your sacrosanct time to be equivalent to 1 second of the CEO's time. You could work at a company for 104,000 hours over the course of half a century or 5 decades, and you will still gross less than what the CEO grosses in revenue in under 30 hours. So it's just a deterrent to work for an employer. Just does not make a modicum of sense, and there's no future in it, because not only can you not afford to attain basic needs and break even on your living expenses while you are working for an employer as an employee, but there's no future in it. It keeps you entrapped in wage slavery because it does not pay a penny on the back end. You're not receiving a pension. You're more than likely not receiving any benefits. You're not receiving any income generating assets. You're not even receiving an equity stake in the company. You should spend your time cultivating a behemoth of a brand and creating income generating assets in order to build up your recurring revenue stream so that you can offset your recurring expenses, which is the only way to get out of poverty. You need to be able to pull yourself out of the muck and mire by being profoundly successful as an entrepreneur. You want to be able to usher in a prosperous, auspicious, abundant, robust future into your life. And you do not want to succumb to living a life fraught with wage slavery and perpetuity, in which you are insurmountably indebted and chronically impoverished. Also bear in mind that working these dead-end jobs full-time will erode every facet of your house. They will adversely impinge on every facet of your house, and they will more than likely shave off decades of your life, because your body can only cope with being besieged by chronic stressors for so long before any one of your 78 organs succumbs to calamitous health issues. So just bear that in mind. Allow that to be indelible. You have 78 organs that you need to care for and tend to the needs of, and your organs are sacrosanct, and compromising the health of your organs, and you're more prone to ailing and contracting a noxious, perilous, deleterious, lethal chronic disease by borrowing equity out of your house just for a pittance of a non-subsistence wage, when you work long hours for an employee and cannot even afford to fund your basic needs, a part of Maslow's hierarchy of needs pyramid. The whole prospect of working for an employer long-term or even short-term does not make a modicum of sense. Your time should be earmarked into building your brands and creating income-generating assets. You should do that profusely for the prospect of being able to pull yourself out of the muck and mire, discharge your debts, and get out of poverty. You do not want your future to be grim, nor bleak, nor inauspicious, nor unfruitful. You want to be able to reach your overarching goals and reach your higher aspirations, or I should say achieve your higher aspirations. You do not want to stagnate in life, nor regress, nor be entrapped in wage slavery. So move your life in a forward movement trajectory and make the prudent, optimal decision to pivot from being a member of the employee workforce to being a full-time entrepreneur. You do not want your income to be capped. You do not want to borrow equity out of your time, life, happiness, wealth, dignity, and health just for a pittance of a non-subsistence, infinitesimal minimum wage that can not provide you with any prosperous future. So I hope that you found this video to be insightful and enlightening. Have a blissful day. Goodbye.